Some mornings begin with ordinary routines and end inside a silence that never fully leaves the people who witnessed it. Have you ever wondered how someone can disappear without warning, without struggle, and without leaving behind a clear explanation? In October of 2005, a respected teacher from a quiet Georgia town vanished almost completely, leaving investigators trapped inside questions that would survive for decades afterward. The disappearance of Tara Grinstead quickly became one of America's most haunting cold cases. Her absence felt unnatural because nothing about her behavior suggested escape, instability, or sudden emotional collapse. The mystery carried another disturbing possibility beneath the surface. Perhaps the person responsible was never a stranger passing through darkness, but someone already woven quietly into the town's familiar daily rhythm and trust. Before we move deeper into this case, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this podcast if you enjoy psychological true crime investigations built around silence, memory, and hidden human behavior. Stories like this rarely reveal themselves through dramatic confessions. Instead, they unfold slowly through contradictions, emotional fractures, and the strange ways guilt reshapes ordinary people, long before investigators ever recognize the damage already waiting beneath appearances. Ocilla, Georgia, was the kind of small southern town where routines felt permanent and familiarity created the illusion of safety. Neighbors recognized vehicles before reading license plates, and front doors often remained unlocked during daylight hours. The town moved with predictable rhythms shaped by football games, church gatherings, school events, and seasonal festivals. Crimes involving violence belonged somewhere else, somewhere larger, louder, and emotionally distant from communities like this one. During the autumn of 2005, the atmosphere in Ocilla carried the soft calmness of rural Georgia life. Beauty pageants, school functions, and community gatherings filled weekends with noise and celebration. Only hours before her disappearance, Tara had participated in a local teen beauty competition connected to students she mentored and encouraged regularly. Stage lights, applause, and nervous laughter still lingered in people's memories long after investigators began searching for explanations instead. Nothing seemed unusual during that quiet October weekend in Ocilla. Porch lights glowed softly, streets remained calm, and families settled into routines expecting another ordinary Monday morning ahead. Yet unresolved disappearances often follow disturbing psychological patterns. Trauma rarely announces itself clearly beforehand. Instead, it hides beneath normal behavior until everyday moments suddenly transform into silent evidence of irreversible decisions afterward forever. At 30 years old, Tara Grinstead represented intelligence, stability, and ambition within a community that admired her deeply. She taught history at Irwin County High School and cared sincerely about students. Years earlier, she participated in local beauty pageants, though people closest to her remembered kindness and reliability far more vividly than appearance, attention, or public recognition afterward personally. Friends consistently described Tara as organized, dependable, and emotionally mature. She followed routines carefully and rarely disappeared without informing someone beforehand. Like many adults balancing careers and private struggles, she also carried invisible pressures beneath composed behavior. Psychological stress rarely appears dramatically in public. More often, it hides beneath smiles and structure until tragedy forces outsiders to examine ordinary lives with painful scrutiny afterward. As investigators examined Tara's personal relationships, attention gradually shifted toward former romantic partners, acquaintances, co-workers, and even past students. Small towns create emotional environments where privacy becomes fragile, because people quietly observe one another constantly. Rumors spread rapidly through silence and suspicion long before evidence appears. Communities facing fear often construct emotional explanations first, hoping certainty will arrive before facts ever truly emerge afterward publicly. Several individuals connected to Tara attracted suspicion because their reactions felt emotionally inconsistent after her disappearance became public knowledge. Some appeared detached, while others gave explanations sounding overly controlled or rehearsed. Criminal psychologists frequently observe these subtle behavioral shifts during investigations involving concealed violence. Guilt, panic, insecurity, and fear can distort emotional regulation quietly, until impulsive actions destroy lives permanently within only moments afterward. After Tara vanished, Ocilla no longer felt emotionally familiar to the people who had trusted its quiet routines for generations. Fear spread differently because the threat seemed local, personal, and invisible. Grocery stores, school hallways, and empty roads suddenly carried unease. Residents realized violence did not always arrive from distant places. Sometimes it already lived quietly among ordinary neighbors nearby. Rumors quickly replaced facts throughout the small Georgia town. Conversations outside churches, restaurants, and football games became filled with speculation about jealousy, hidden affairs, addiction, and emotional conflict. Communities facing uncertainty often create explanations rapidly because silence feels psychologically unbearable. Unfortunately, these theories can damage innocent people while distracting investigators from meaningful details hidden inside fragile evidence afterward. As detectives studied Tara's life more carefully, another disturbing reality slowly emerged. Nothing indicated she intended to disappear voluntarily. Her future plans, personal belongings, and professional obligations remained unfinished. Most adults preparing to leave their lives behind display emotional withdrawal beforehand. Tara showed none of those behavioral patterns. Instead, her disappearance suggested sudden interruption caused by unexpected crisis or confrontation. Cases involving missing adults without physical evidence often become emotional battlegrounds between logic and hope. Investigators search for forensic answers, while families search for emotional reassurance. Without a body, grief cannot settle naturally because uncertainty survives continuously beside fear. This psychological tension explains why cold cases become obsessions, especially when victims seemed deeply connected to stable communities before disappearing without warning afterward. As months passed, the atmosphere inside Ocilla became increasingly unsettling. Residents wondered not only who harmed Tara, but how someone responsible could continue living normally afterward. Criminal psychology repeatedly shows offenders often maintain ordinary routines after violence. They attend work, smile publicly, and continue social interactions while privately carrying knowledge capable of destroying entire communities if finally exposed completely someday, afterward publicly. By the end of October 2005, Tara Grinstead had become more than a missing teacher. She became the center of a mystery haunting Georgia for years afterward. Her abandoned routines, empty home, and unexplained absence created emotional fractures impossible to ignore. Somewhere behind the rumors, contradictions, and carefully controlled expressions, someone already understood the truth hidden beneath silence and fear for years afterward. On the evening of October 22, 2005, Tara Grinstead attended a local beauty pageant held to support students from Irwin County High School. Witnesses later remembered her smiling beneath the bright stage lights while calmly helping contestants prepare backstage. Nothing about her behavior appeared unusual that night. To everyone around her, Tara seemed relaxed, confident, and completely unaware of the tragedy approaching. In small southern towns like Ocilla, beauty pageants carried far more meaning than simple entertainment. They represented reputation, social connection, and a sense of belonging within the community. Tara understood that world personally because she had once competed in pageants herself years earlier. Local residents admired her not only for her appearance, but also for her professionalism, kindness, and composed personality. After the pageant ended, Tara reportedly spent a short amount of time speaking with acquaintances before driving home alone. Later, investigators tried to reconstruct every detail of her final known movements with painful precision. In missing person cases, even the smallest moments suddenly become important. Ordinary conversations, brief encounters, and simple observations often gain enormous emotional significance afterward. Neighbors later confirmed that Tara's car remained parked outside her home throughout the entire night. At first, that detail sounded reassuring because it suggested she had arrived home safely. However, investigators often view stationary objects differently in disappearances. A vehicle left untouched can suggest interrupted plans and unfinished routines. It creates the unsettling feeling that normal life suddenly stopped without warning. By the following morning, Tara Grinstead's cell phone was no longer active. Friends who attempted to contact her received only silence. In 2005, digital tracking technology remained far less advanced than it is today, forcing detectives to rely heavily on witness interviews and physical evidence. The lack of immediate answers allowed uncertainty and fear to spread quickly throughout the small community of Ocilla. Tara had planned to return to Irwin County High School on Monday morning as usual. Co-workers fully expected her arrival because she was known for being dependable, organized, and responsible. People close to her struggled to believe she would disappear voluntarily. Such behavior seemed completely inconsistent with the routines, habits, and personality traits that had defined her life for many years. When Monday arrived and Tara failed to appear at school, concern immediately spread among teachers and staff members. People who work in structured environments often recognize unusual behavior very quickly. What began as confusion soon transformed into alarm. Adults rarely vanish without explanation, especially in close communities where familiar routines and daily patterns normally remain stable and predictable. Authorities eventually entered Tara's home and discovered several details that complicated the investigation almost immediately. Her vehicle still sat outside, suggesting she had returned safely after the pageant. Inside, the house appeared quiet, but strangely unsettling. Lights remained on, and certain belongings seemed oddly out of place. Investigators sensed interruption rather than the calm atmosphere of an ordinary evening at home. Another troubling detail quickly intensified suspicion. Tara's purse, keys, and cellular phone were all missing, even though her car remained parked outside untouched. Psychologically, this contradiction mattered greatly because it suggested movement without transportation. Adults who leave voluntarily usually prepare carefully beforehand. Instead, the scene reflected confusion and fragmentation, almost as though emotional control had collapsed unexpectedly within moments. Investigators also discovered a discarded latex glove outside the residence. That single object immediately raised concerns about contamination, concealment, or attempts to avoid leaving evidence behind. Criminal offenders frequently overestimate their ability to manage crime scenes under pressure. Whether directly connected to Tara's disappearance or not, the glove introduced disturbing possibilities involving fear, preparation, and hidden accountability. As the hours passed without contact, Tara's family and closest friends entered a painful state of uncertainty. Missing person cases create a unique kind of suffering because emotional closure becomes impossible. Hope and fear continue existing side by side. Every unanswered phone call feels important. Every rumor suddenly appears meaningful. Without confirmation, the human mind struggles to accept reality and remains trapped in survival mode. Search teams searched forests, ponds, empty fields, and isolated roads surrounding Ocilla for any trace of Tara Grinstead. Volunteers worked beside investigators through long, exhausting days that produced little evidence. Tracking dogs struggled with fading scent trails, while weather and environmental exposure likely destroyed fragile forensic clues early, slowly eliminating opportunities detectives desperately needed to advance the case. The absence of evidence supporting voluntary disappearance only increased fear throughout the community. Tara had left behind responsibilities, personal belongings, and future plans inconsistent with intentional escape. Criminal psychologists often note that emotionally stable adults rarely vanish impulsively without preparation. Investigators instead observed signs suggesting interruption, fear, or sudden confrontation occurring unexpectedly within an otherwise familiar environment. As days turned into weeks, detectives focused more heavily on people connected to Tara's personal life. Former partners, acquaintances, and several community members faced increasing scrutiny during interviews. Some witnesses later changed details in their statements. Investigators understood memory shifts under stress, yet contradictions often raised suspicions of deception or knowledge. Other reactions troubled investigators for different psychological reasons. Certain individuals appeared unusually calm, despite the emotional devastation surrounding Tara's disappearance. Emotional detachment alone could never prove guilt, yet strange behavior after traumatic events naturally attracts attention. In some cases, offenders psychologically distance themselves from crimes while continuing routines and hiding fear. Rumors about secret relationships and emotional tension spread quickly across Ocilla as fear consumed the community. In small towns, gossip often grows when people desperately search for explanations during tragedy. Investigators questioned whether the crime scene had been carefully staged, since manipulated disappearances frequently contain tiny inconsistencies hidden beneath otherwise calm, believable, and controlled appearances. Years passed, and Tara's disappearance slowly entered cold case territory as silence settled heavily over the investigation. Then the podcast Up and Vanished unexpectedly revived national attention surrounding the case. Renewed public scrutiny created psychological pressure upon people connected to the investigation. Suddenly, individuals who had remained quiet for years found themselves facing growing suspicion and uncomfortable questions once again. Eventually, after more than a decade, one man publicly confessed involvement in Tara Grinstead's disappearance. Yet the confession failed to erase uncertainty completely. Instead, it deepened disturbing questions surrounding guilt, panic, and concealed violence hidden beneath ordinary behavior for years. Communities often imagine evil appearing visibly monstrous, though criminal reality is usually far more unsettling than people expect. The early investigation into Tara Grinstead's disappearance revealed how fragile criminal evidence becomes when uncertainty dominates critical first hours. Investigators later faced criticism because Tara's residence had not been fully secured immediately. Friends, relatives, officers, and community members entered spaces potentially containing important forensic traces, unintentionally damaging evidence capable of reconstructing events afterward permanently. Environmental conditions likely intensified those investigative problems further afterward. Weather exposure, foot traffic, and delayed forensic processing may have erased subtle biological evidence before authorities fully recognized the seriousness of Tara's disappearance. Unlike modern investigations supported heavily through digital surveillance, this case unfolded with almost no technological safety net available. No cameras, eyewitnesses, or reliable visual timeline existed afterward publicly. Because of those limitations, investigators concentrated heavily upon Tara's relationships and social environment. Statistically, adult disappearances involving violence often originate from familiar connections rather than random attacks. Detectives examined former partners, acquaintances, co-workers, and individuals emotionally connected to her private life carefully. Yet suspicion alone never became sufficient because emotional intuition without physical evidence rarely survives legal scrutiny afterward publicly. As weeks became months, the investigation drifted steadily toward paralysis. Detectives possessed contradictions, fragments, and behavioral inconsistencies, but no definitive breakthrough ever emerged. Cases lacking bodies create extraordinary psychological and legal barriers because absence itself becomes the central problem. Investigators cannot fully reconstruct violence they cannot physically examine, while offenders gradually gain confidence afterward through prolonged silence publicly. National media soon transformed Tara Grinstead's disappearance into a recognized national mystery. Headlines described her as the beautiful teacher who vanished without warning from rural Georgia. Public fascination intensified because the case violated assumptions associated with small communities. Disappearances without resolution disturb people psychologically because they erase closure, forcing audiences into endless speculation surrounding invisible violence afterward permanently. Online forums and early true crime communities amplified speculation aggressively afterward. Some theories proposed stranger abduction, while others imagined secret affairs, organized crime, or voluntary disappearance. The internet often becomes a psychological projection space where fear transforms into elaborate storytelling. Unfortunately, speculation damages investigations because false accusations spread rapidly, isolating innocent people while obscuring genuine evidence beneath emotionally satisfying narratives afterward online. Tara's family endured overwhelming emotional pressure throughout those years. Relatives suffered uncertainty surrounding her fate while also facing invasive rumors involving her private life. Families connected to missing person investigations often experience secondary trauma caused by scrutiny itself. Every interview, photograph, or emotional reaction becomes publicly analyzed once grief is interpreted through unresolved criminal suspicion, afterward repeatedly online. More than a decade later, the podcast Up and Vanished unexpectedly revived national attention surrounding Tara's disappearance. The series re-examined inconsistencies and interviewed individuals connected to Ocilla carefully. Unlike traditional news coverage, long-form podcast storytelling created sustained psychological pressure. Silence became harder maintaining because listeners nationwide now examined details many residents had spent years emotionally suppressing afterward publicly. That renewed attention produced an important psychological effect commonly observed in cold cases. Time weakens certainty but gradually erodes emotional control as well. Individuals hiding secrets frequently convince themselves investigations will disappear permanently. When scrutiny suddenly returns, suppressed anxiety resurfaces intensely. Former witnesses reconsider loyalties, guilty individuals become unstable, and forgotten contradictions regain significance afterward publicly once again. Over the years, numerous men connected to Tara Grinstead underwent intense scrutiny from investigators. Former romantic relationships attracted particular attention because crimes rooted in emotional conflict often emerge through jealousy, rejection, or humiliation. Yet, despite persistent rumors, detectives never uncovered enough physical evidence supporting murder charges. The investigation remained psychologically frustrating afterward, publicly. Eventually, attention shifted toward former students, Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes. Investigators increasingly suspected the crime involved individuals deeply familiar with Ocilla's geography and social structure. Rural offenders often rely upon environmental knowledge during concealment efforts because isolation naturally protects against discovery. Psychological profiling suggested whoever removed Tara's body understood remote locations intimately and maintained silence privately afterward. As investigators examined Tara Grinstead's personal life more carefully, uncomfortable details gradually emerged. Behind her composed public image existed complicated relationships and private emotional tensions unfamiliar to much of the community. Public perception shifted unfairly afterward, yet investigators emphasized repeatedly that secrecy, emotional conflict, or personal mistakes never justify violence, disappearance, or murder afterward under any circumstance. Ryan Duke's background attracted increasing concern because it reflected instability, substance abuse, and emotional disorganization throughout much of his early adulthood. Individuals struggling with addiction often experience impaired impulse control, especially during stress or intoxication. Investigators questioned whether panic rather than calculated predation explained Tara's death, since emotionally chaotic crimes frequently produce inconsistent concealment afterward publicly. Bo Dukes became another important figure because investigators believed he helped conceal the crime after Tara died. Psychologically, accessory behavior often develops through fear, loyalty, dependency, or self-preservation rather than homicidal intent itself. Yet assisting concealment transforms silence into participation. Once evidence is destroyed, individuals become emotionally trapped because confession would expose their own complicity afterward publicly. In 2017, the investigation experienced its most dramatic turning point when Ryan Duke finally confessed involvement in Tara Grinstead's death. According to his statement, he entered Tara's home, and a confrontation accidentally became fatal. He later claimed Tara's body was transported and burned within a remote rural area. Yet most physical remains were never recovered afterward. The confession answered some questions while creating many others. Investigators and psychologists struggled determining how much of Ryan Duke's account reflected truth, distortion, or self-protective revision shaped through years of fear and guilt. Ultimately, the case revealed a disturbing reality. Truth often hides inside everything people desperately attempt concealing afterward. Even after confessions, arrests, and years of investigation, the disappearance of Tara Grinstead continues resisting complete explanation. Some mysteries survive because human behavior distorts truth faster than investigators reconstruct it. Every statement and emotional reaction surrounding Tara's final hours remains filtered through fear, shame, panic, and self-preservation, afterward internally for years. The most widely accepted theory argues Tara died during a confrontation involving someone familiar with her routines and environment. Investigators found no signs of violent forced entry, suggesting she may have opened the door willingly herself. Psychologically, this matters deeply because victims naturally lower emotional defenses around familiar individuals inside trusted environments afterward during nighttime interactions. Supporters of this theory believe the violence may not have begun as a carefully organized murder initially. Instead, it may have emerged through emotional panic, humiliation, fear, or impulsive conflict, escalating unexpectedly beyond control. Criminal psychology repeatedly demonstrates that unplanned killings often produce chaotic concealment because offenders react emotionally instead of strategically afterward entirely. Ryan Duke's confession strengthened this interpretation for many observers afterward publicly. His statement suggested panic, confusion, and desperate concealment attempts, rather than the emotional profile of a calculated predator. Yet confessions remain psychologically complicated because guilt reshapes memory over time. Individuals frequently minimize intent or detach themselves internally from responsibility afterward psychologically. Another theory continues haunting public discussion surrounding Tara Grinstead's disappearance. Some investigators and observers still suspect another person played a larger role than officially acknowledged. The absence of complete physical remains leaves critical gaps within the timeline. When forensic evidence remains incomplete, uncertainty survives because human psychology resists unresolved narratives lacking definitive reconstruction afterward publicly. This second theory imagines an opportunistic predator entering Tara's life unexpectedly during vulnerable nighttime circumstances. While less supported officially, the possibility persists because randomness itself feels terrifyingly plausible psychologically. Violent offenders sometimes act impulsively when opportunity appears suddenly. In these situations, crimes emerge through predatory instinct combined with environmental isolation rather than emotional history or personal connection afterward. Public doubt also survives because important statements surrounding the case shifted repeatedly over time. Contradictions create psychological instability within investigations because they weaken confidence in official narratives. People begin questioning whether additional omissions remain hidden beneath the surface. Was the confession complete, partially true, or strategically incomplete. Once deception begins, further concealment often develops naturally afterward publicly. At the center of these competing theories lies a disturbing psychological question. Did this crime reflect panic from someone familiar desperately hiding a catastrophic mistake, or the calculated behavior of a predator exploiting vulnerability without emotional attachment? Both possibilities reveal frightening truths about human behavior. One exposes emotional collapse, while the other reveals predatory indifference afterward publicly. The psychological dimensions of this case reflect patterns commonly observed after unintended yet fatal violence occurs suddenly. Instead of seeking emergency help, offenders often experience survival panic, overpowering empathy completely. The mind shifts rapidly towards self-protection, focusing entirely upon consequences rather than morality. Once panic dominates cognition, concealment behavior may begin before emotional processing fully catches up with reality afterward internally. The reported burning of Tara Grinstead's remains carries disturbing psychological symbolism beyond simple evidence concealment. Destroying a body often reflects an obsessive desire to erase consequences emotionally and physically simultaneously. Fire becomes a false attempt at control, yet psychological burden frequently intensifies afterward because destruction cannot silence guilt, memory, accountability, or unresolved moral fear internally. Another painful element involves trust itself. Tara may never have recognized approaching danger because the person confronting her seemed emotionally familiar or socially harmless. Human survival depends upon trust developed through ordinary interactions. Predators exploit those instincts precisely because suspicion rarely activates immediately around recognizable people. Many violent crimes occur when danger disguises itself as routine familiarity afterward nearby. Small towns create unique psychological environments, unintentionally protecting offenders afterward for years. Communities built upon familiarity often resist imagining violence emerging internally because shared identity depends upon trust and emotional stability. Once crime occurs, denial becomes psychologically comforting. People unconsciously protect reputations and memories because accepting truth threatens collective security itself, allowing silence to reshape perception afterward quietly over time. From a broader philosophical perspective, the case reflects Eastern ideas regarding consequence and moral balance. Every action leaves traces, even when physical evidence temporarily disappears. Human justice systems may fail or remain incomplete, but hidden truths continue influencing lives silently across years. More than a decade passed before confessions emerged publicly, fracturing silence beneath accumulated psychological pressure afterward, inevitably. Western philosophical interpretations often focus upon darker aspects of human nature, revealed through crimes like this. Beneath morality and social structure exists a fragile psychological boundary, separating restraint from destructive impulse. Cases involving concealed violence demonstrate how quickly ordinary individuals may collapse ethically through fear, humiliation, addiction, or panic. Human beings sometimes become psychologically unrecognizable during emotional crisis afterward. The town of Ocilla never fully recovered its original sense of safety after Tara disappeared. Residents learned peaceful environments cannot eliminate hidden instability within human behavior. Fear permanently changed how people viewed neighbors, relationships, and daily routines afterward. Communities touched by unresolved violence often develop lasting psychological scars because emotional trust rarely returns completely afterward publicly again. Tara Grinstead remains more than a missing person preserved within investigative archives and documentaries. She was a teacher, mentor, daughter, colleague, and meaningful presence within ordinary moments, permanently interrupted afterward. Despite confessions and legal developments, her family never received complete recovery or emotional closure. True resolution requires more than fragmented admissions or incomplete evidence identifying responsibility afterward publicly. Some crimes leave behind no screams, only unanswered questions carried through years of silence. The disappearance of Tara Grinstead reminds us that darkness rarely arrives openly. It hides beneath ordinary routines and familiar faces until tragedy surfaces unexpectedly. And sometimes, silence echoes louder than confession ever could afterward. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.